Over the past some months, the topic of negativity in the sports card hobby seems to keep coming up in content creator spaces over and over. And the more I listen to these conversations, the more it seems to me that there are actually two separate conversations going on that seem to be confused as one conversation, creating a situation where people are misconstruing what others are saying. But it's often because they're thinking of it as one conversation topic when really there are two separate and distinct things being talked about. Let's get into this a bit deeper. Now, I'm going to do my best here to summarize what I see as the two different conversations going on that sometimes seem to get confused as one topic. First conversation, number one, negativity in the hobby, in which negativity is defined as things like shill bidding, pumping and dumping, market manipulation, and these kinds of what could be said market-centered dishonesty and actions lacking integrity, and how this kind of negativity is bad for the hobby and needs to be seen, recognized, called out, and dealt with. But then the second conversation is looking at the concept of negativity in a completely different way. Number two, negativity in the hobby, in which negativity is defined as people being buttholes, people backbiting, people bashing other individuals, people just generally being douchebags. And many of these kinds of videos point out that these kinds of people are actually pretty rare in the hobby, and that the best approach sometimes for these kinds of asshats is just simply to ignore them and let them fade off into their own tornado of darkness. Just let that kind of stuff die on the vine. Don't give it the time of day and it just fades from view. However, since these two conversations or these two different concepts of negativity are sometimes getting confused with each other, it's creating rifts where rifts need not exist. If someone is approaching the concept of negativity from the idea of how important it is to recognize, call out, and uproot actions that are harmful to the hobby, like shill bidding and market manipulation, etc., and someone else is saying we need to ignore negativity in the hobby, the first person is coming at it from the angle of, oh, that second person is saying we should ignore all this harmful stuff, like shill bidding, market manipulation, etc. that's going on. But that's not what the second person is saying at all. What the second person is saying is we need to ignore those assholes who are just plain assholes. But that's not how the first person is hearing it. They are hearing it as the second person staring at the sky and appreciating the sunset while ignoring all the litter all over the grounds. Like they're just not seeing the full reality of the present moment. But in reality, they're simply just looking at two entirely separate things. The first person is looking at the second person and thinking he is ignoring realities that are essential to understand if we were to make sure the hobby is on a healthy path. And the second person is looking at the first person and thinking he is defending people who are being straight venomous and vicious to others. It's two entirely different topics masquerading as one. But let me give a bit more of a concrete kind of context. Let's say this content creator over here is spewing venom about, for example, how someone else in the hobby doesn't know what he's doing, lives in his parents' apartment, which is somehow meant to be proof that the guy doesn't know what he's doing, and has thumbnails that they say make him look like a terrorist. And this right here is actually a real example of what someone was saying about another content creator, by the way. As much as I actually used to quite like a lot of his content, he's 100% lost me as an audience member for life. To me, this is the kind of negativity in the hobby that is the kind of negativity to just let die on the vine. If the hobby gives these kinds of voices focus, it's just giving a bullhorn to verbal farts that no one needs to hear. So when I hear other content creators talking about ignoring negativity in the hobby, what I'm hearing them say is to ignore these ignorant assholes and appreciate the positive people in the community that make up the vast majority of us, and build up the community from those kinds of connections, the meaningful ones, the positive ones. That's what I hear from a person that is saying ignore the negativity. But on the other hand, let's take another example of a content creator who focuses some of his platform on identifying dishonest things going on in the hobby in order to prevent others from getting caught in a web of lies and deceit. That is a totally different kind of negativity. That is the kind of negativity that only survives if it is ignored. With this kind of negativity, you can't just let it die on the vine because it thrives in the darkness. It lives on remaining hidden. If someone is recognized as blatantly manipulating the market for their own personal advantage, like by shill bidding or pumping and dumping or whatever, it's important that others recognize those actions so they don't end up making decisions for themselves based on others being deceitful. This is the kind of thing that dies only when a light is shined on it, so calling out that kind of negativity is a positive thing to do. So when I hear someone saying that we cannot ignore the negativity, this is what I'm hearing them say. So essentially, I both agree with the first person saying we need to ignore the negativity, and I also agree with the second person saying that we cannot ignore the negativity, because the negativity they're each talking about are two completely different things. That being said, however, I do think there is one important point I have to make in connection with this idea here. Just because someone says someone else is being dishonest or engaging in pumping and dumping or something like this doesn't mean it is always true. Some people see things that aren't there or read into things based on only assumptions. And you know what they say, what happens when you assume something? It makes an ass out of you and me. In particular, I've seen people who have larger platforms being accused of these kinds of actions. But I think a lot of this stems from the fact that the mere size of their platform ends up influencing the market in some ways, even if that is not what they are trying to do. But for those bigger platforms that do have the potential to inadvertently manipulate the market, I think it does speak for the need for them to be hyper aware of their own influence on the market and to recognize that influence as a reality and to think about that when they are thinking about the nature of the content they are choosing to create. I think some bigger platforms recognize this early on and choose to be careful about not hyping up certain things that may end up spiking it almost as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Others take a little longer to learn it, but eventually do recognize it and attempt to make adjustments as they move forward. And then a third group of others are there to take full advantage of it with full awareness of what they're doing and just going down the rabbit hole of straight up lacking integrity. That third scenario, I would say, does need to be called out. But sometimes people are calling out people who are in those first two categories, just assuming they are in that third category. And I think that that is not a good thing to do at all, and it actually makes it easier for the truly dishonest actors to get away with their crap, giggling as everyone puts their attention on people and platforms who are actually doing their best to learn and make adjustments when necessary. So anyway, all this being said, do I think that you should ignore the negativity in the hobby, or do I think you should not ignore the negativity in the hobby? And I think both. It just depends on what is the definition of negativity that you're talking about.